Ethan woke up that morning feeling heavier than usual, even though nothing in particular had gone wrong. It was one of those days where the body felt tired before the day even started. The mind felt cluttered, even though nothing bad had happened yet. He lay in bed for a while, staring at the faint morning light leaking through his curtains. The alarm had already rung twice, but he had hit snooze both times. He wasn't running late, but he wasn't early either. Everything felt a bit sluggish, his thoughts, his breathing, even the act of sitting up. He rubbed his eyes and swung his legs off the bed, trying to shake off the foggy feeling. He had a long day ahead at work, full of meetings, deadlines, and clients expecting him to solve their problems as if they were simple puzzles. For years he had been good at it. Very good, actually. But lately, the constant pace had started to wear him down. He wasn't unhappy with his job, but he wasn't excited either. It was just something he did day after day. He walked to the kitchen and opened the fridge, staring at the shelves like he expected something interesting to appear. There wasn't much leftover takeout, a bottle of water, and a half-empty carton of eggs. He closed the fridge slowly and decided he didn't feel like cooking. Breakfast at home suddenly felt like a chore, and he didn't want to start his day with another chore. He grabbed his jacket and stepped outside. The morning air was cool and crisp, not too cold, but refreshing enough to wake him up a little. The street was still quiet, with a few cars passing by and a couple of people walking their dogs. It was a normal weekday morning, the kind that felt the same as the one before and the one before that. As he walked, kept thinking about where he wanted to go. There were plenty of cafes around, but most of them were busy at this hour, filled with people in suits rushing to grab their coffee before work. He wanted something calm, something simple. He didn't want a rushed, crowded place where he'd have to stand in line and shout his order over. The sound of espresso machines and chatter. A few minutes later, he remembered a small diner he had passed by several times, but never visited. It wasn't fancy or modern, no shiny signs or trendy decorations. It looked old, but in a comforting way, like a place that had stayed the same while the world around it kept changing. The windows were fogged slightly from the warmth inside, and a small, open sign hung in the corner of the door. He wasn't sure why, but the thought of going there felt right. He reached the diner and pushed the door open. A small bell above the door chimed softly, announcing his arrival. The sound was familiar, even though he'd never been inside before, like something from a childhood memory. The place was almost empty, except for an older couple sitting near the window and a man reading a newspaper at the counter. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Mixed with the scent of toasted bread and something warm cooking on the stove, he felt himself lax a little as he stepped inside. The diner had a warm glow, with soft yellow lights hanging above each table. The decor was simple red booth seats, cream-colored walls, and framed pictures of old city streets. Everything looked slightly worn but clean, like it had been taken care of for years by someone who loved the place. He chose a booth near the back, where he could sit quietly and watch the room without being too noticeable. He liked observing people, not in a nosy way, but in a thoughtful one. It helped him slow down and remember that the world was bigger than his own thoughts and deadlines. A few seconds later, a young woman walked toward him with a notepad in her hand. Her smile was warm, but he could tell it carried a tiredness behind it, not exhaustion. But the kind of tiredness that comes from long days and late nights stacked on top of each other. "Good morning," she said softly. "Would you like some coffee to start?" Her voice was gentle, with a hint of roughness that suggested she'd been awake since dawn. Ethan nodded with a faint smile of his own. "Yes, coffee would be great," he said. She scribbled something on her notepad and turned to go, but something about her expression caught his attention. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was more like someone who had learned to smile even when life felt heavy. He couldn't fully explain it, but he sensed it. He settled into the booth, leaning back a little and letting the quietness of the diner sink in. Outside, the morning was slowly getting brighter, but inside everything felt slow and calm. The older couple near the window laughed softly, sharing a plate of pancakes. The man at the counter turned a page in his newspaper, sipping his coffee with a relaxed rhythm. Behind the counter, the cook hummed quietly while preparing something on the grill. The waitress returned with a warm cup of coffee and set it gently in front of him. The cup was simple white, slightly chipped on one edge, but the steam rising from it smelled rich and comforting. "Here you go," she said. "Let me know when you're ready to order." He nodded again. "Thank you." She walked away to check on the other tables, and Ethan watched her for a moment. She moved quickly, but not in a frantic way, more like someone who had learned to do many things at once out of habit. She greeted the older couple with an easy smile, refilled the man's coffee at the counter without him needing to ask, and then returned to the kitchen to grab plates for someone else. Her steps were light but purposeful. Ethan took a slow sip of his coffee. It tasted good, simple, strong, the kind that didn't need extra flavors or fancy foam art. It reminded him of the small diner his father used to take him to when he was a kid. They would sit at the counter, order breakfast, and talk about school, sports, or whatever came to mind. His father always said that simple places had more heart. Ethan found himself smiling at the memory. The waitress came back with her notepad. "Have you decided?" she asked. He looked at the menu earlier, but now he didn't need it. "Just some toast and maybe scrambled eggs," he said. "Something light." She wrote it down with a nod. "Sure thing. I'll have that out for you soon." She turned to leave. Ethan noticed the faint lines under her eyes, the kind that came from lack of sleep. Her hair was neatly tied back, but a few loose strands fell near her face. She brushed them aside quickly, almost unconsciously. Her uniform was clean but slightly worn at the edges. He wondered how many hours she worked every day, how early she had to wake up, and how late she stayed. He didn't ask, of course. It wasn't his place. He was just a customer, and she was just doing her job. But something inside him felt curious, not in a prying way, but in a human way. He hadn't expected to feel anything more than hunger this morning, yet something about her had stirred a quiet sense of concern in him. His breakfast arrived sooner than he expected. The toast was golden and crisp, the eggs soft and warm. It wasn't fancy, but it felt comforting. He thanked her as she placed the plate on the table. "No problem," she replied with a small nod. He began eating slowly, savoring each bite, not because the food was extraordinary, but because the moment felt peaceful. He rarely had mornings like this, mornings where he wasn't rushing or thinking about work. He found himself watching the room again, noticing the small details. A radio played softly from somewhere behind the counter, a gentle tune that filled the background. The cook joked lightly with one of the customers, and the waitress laughed quietly at something the older woman near the window said. It was all simple, ordinary, almost forgettable in the grand scheme of life. Yet it felt strangely meaningful. As he ate, the waitress passed by his table again to refill his coffee. She moved with practiced ease, balancing plates, taking orders, wiping tables. But when she thought no one was looking, her smile faded for a moment. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't sigh or slump her shoulders. It was just a small shift in her face. The kind that people show only when they're tired, in a way that goes deeper than sleep. Ethan felt a small tug in his chest. He hadn't come here expecting to notice anything beyond his breakfast. He definitely hadn't expected to care about the life of someone he didn't even know. But something about her made him pay attention. Maybe it was the way she kept smiling even when her eyes looked exhausted. Maybe it was the way she treated every customer kindly, even the ones who barely looked at her. Or maybe, deep down, he recognized something familiar in her struggle, the quiet kind that people carry. Without saying anything, he didn't know her story yet. He didn't know what she went home to each night, or what she woke up to each morning. But he sensed that behind her calm smile was a life that wasn't easy. He took another sip of coffee, feeling the warmth spread through him. He had only come here to escape the routine of his mornings, to enjoy a simple breakfast in a quiet place. But something told him that this morning was going to leave more of a mark on him than he expected. He didn't know yet that a single conversation later would change how he saw things. He didn't know that her words would stay with him long after he left the diner. He didn't know that this simple morning would become something he would remember again and again. Right now, he only knew one thing. He had walked in hungry for breakfast. But a part of him was slowly waking up to something deeper, something he couldn't name yet, but would soon understand. Ethan sat quietly in his booth, stirring the last bit of his coffee even though he wasn't planning to drink it. He kept glancing around the diner, letting his eyes wander from table to table while he waited for the waitress to pass by again. There was something about her that pulled his attention more than he expected. He didn't know her, yet somehow he felt like he could sense pieces of her life hidden behind the smile she kept giving customers. The diner stayed calm, with just a handful of people coming in and out. The older couple had finished their pancakes and were slowly getting ready to leave. Moving with the gentle rhythm of people who had been together for many years, the man at the counter folded his newspaper neatly, paid his bill, and thanked the cook before heading out. The place grew even quieter, and the soft sound of the radio filled the background more clearly. The waitress finally walked past Ethan's table again with a fresh pot of coffee in her hand. She paused and gave him a small smile. "Would you like a refill?" she asked politely. He looked at his cup, still half full, and shook his head. "I'm good for now, but can I ask you something?" She didn't seem surprised. People often made small talk with servers, and she looked used to it. She nodded, holding the coffee pot close to her side. "Sure, what's up?" Ethan hesitated for a second, not wanting to sound intrusive. He didn't want her to think he was prying. He just wanted to connect, even in a small way. "You seem really good at what you do," he said. "You're polite, fast, and you remember everyone's orders without checking. Have you been working here long?" She breathed out a small laugh, the quiet kind someone lets out when they don't know exactly how to answer. "Feels like forever," she said softly. "But it's been about 3 years." "3 years," he repeated. "That's a long time." She nodded but didn't look proud or annoyed. Her expression was neutral, maybe a little tired, like she wasn't sure if 3 years was worth celebrating. "It's honest work," she said after a moment. "And the people are nice. That's something." Ethan smiled lightly. "I guess that makes the long days a little easier?" The smile on her face softened, but her eyes drifted away for a second. She looked toward the counter, then back at him. "Long days are long days," she said quietly, "but you get used to them." There was something in her tone, something unguarded for just a moment, that made Ethan pay even closer attention. She wasn't complaining. She wasn't bitter, but she wasn't fine either. It was a simple truth, spoken by someone who didn't have the luxury of slowing down. He nodded slowly. "I hope they don't work you too hard." She gave a tiny shrug. "Someone has to keep the place running. And mornings are usually slow, so it's not too bad." Couldn't help asking, "And slow mornings mean fewer tips?" She paused for the first time since they started talking. Not a big pause, just a small one, like she had to decide whether to answer honestly or politely. Finally, she lowered the coffee pot onto his table and held it with both hands, almost as if she didn't want to rush through her response. "Yeah," she said in a lower voice. "Slow mornings mean fewer tips." He nodded, expecting her to move on. But she didn't. She stayed there, standing next to his table, as if part of her wanted to explain more. "You know," she continued gently, "people think tips are just extra money like a bonus. But for most of us, it's most of our income. Some days it's good. Some days it's not even enough to cover a bus ride home." Ethan stopped stirring his cup. She didn't look at him when she said it. Her eyes were fixed on the coffee pot, as if she was talking to it instead of to him. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't desperate. It was just honest. Completely and quietly honest. He felt something tighten in his chest. Not guilt, but a kind of sudden awareness. A realization that he had taken many things for granted in his own life. He had never depended on a stranger's spare change to pay for groceries. He had never hoped for a busy day just to make sure he could buy enough food for the week. He cleared his throat softly. "That sounds really hard." She looked up finally, giving him a small smile that wasn't really a smile. "It's just life. Everyone deals with something." He wanted to ask more, but he didn't want to make her uncomfortable. Still, something told him she wouldn't have shared even that much. She wasn't carrying something heavy inside her. He leaned his elbows on the table. "Do you live far from here?" "A bit," she said. "About 40 minutes away?" "By bus?" She nodded. "Most days. Sometimes I walk if it's late, and the buses get weird Or slow? Ethan frowned slightly. You walk 40 minutes? She gave another small shrug. It's cheaper than waiting for a bus that might not show up. He let that sink in. To him, a missed bus was an inconvenience. To her, it was another expense she couldn't afford. She shifted the coffee pot in her hands and glanced toward the door, where 2 new customers walked in. She straightened up quickly, as if switching back to her professional mode. I should go check on them, she said softly. Let me know if you need anything else. Before he could reply, she walked away, greeting the new customers with that same warm, practiced smile. Ethan watched her move between tables again, fast, efficient, polite. But now, every action felt different, because he could see beneath the surface. He noticed the quick, careful way she counted, change before handing it to a customer, as if every coin mattered. He saw how she checked her apron pocket twice, making sure she hadn't lost a single tip. He saw how she rubbed her wrist gently when she thought no one was watching, as if it ached from carrying plates for too many hours. He took a deep breath, feeling oddly emotional for reasons he couldn't fully explain. He didn't know this woman, yet he felt connected to the truth she had shared. He felt like he had been allowed to see something, real something, most people never bothered to look at. He finished the last of his toast slowly. Not because he was still hungry, but because he didn't want to rush the moment. He wanted to stay a little longer, to understand more, to let the morning unfold naturally. After taking the new customers' orders, the waitress returned to the counter. The cook handed her 2 plates, and she carried them with steady hands, setting them down perfectly in front of the customers. She made a little joke about the size of the pancakes, and they laughed. Her smile brightened for a second, real this time. Before fading into that tired warmth again, Ethan watched everything quietly. He wasn't judging, and he wasn't trying to fix anything. He just wanted to understand the world she lived in, the world so many people lived in, without ever asking for sympathy. A few minutes later, she walked back to his booth to check in. How's everything? She asked gently. It's good, he said. Thank you. The food was perfect. I'm glad, she replied, and for a moment, something about her expression softened again. She looked like someone who didn't get genuine appreciation very often. He hesitated, then asked, Do you ever get a break? She laughed lightly, shaking her head. Sometimes, maybe later, but mornings are usually my double shift days. Double. He repeated, surprised. Yeah, I start early, then stay through lunch. It's not ideal, but extra hours mean extra chance for tips. She paused, then added, Even if it's not always enough. Her honesty hit him again, gently but firmly, like waves brushing against the shore. She wasn't trying to make him feel sorry. She wasn't trying to convince him of anything. She was simply sharing her reality because he had bothered to ask with genuine interest. He looked at her with quiet respect. You work really hard, she smiled again, and this time it felt grateful. Thank you. Not everyone notices. I think more people would notice if they actually paid attention, he said. She didn't respond right away, but the look she gave him said more than words could. It was a look that carried years of small struggles, quiet strength, silent hope that things might get better someday. Then she took a small step back, giving him space. I'll let you finish up. Just wave if you need anything. As she walked away again, Ethan felt something shift inside him. What began as a simple breakfast had turned into something much deeper. He had walked in wanting a quiet morning, but he had stumbled into a moment of truth, one that opened his eyes in a way he didn't expect. He watched her move from table to table, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a genuine pull to understand someone else's world, not out of curiosity. Not out of pity, but out of genuine human connection. And although he didn't realize it yet, this small conversation was only the beginning of something much bigger. Ethan sat quietly in the booth long after he finished his breakfast, letting the calm atmosphere settle around him. He wasn't in a hurry to leave, even though he knew he should probably head to work soon. Something about the diner kept him in place. Maybe it was the soft humming sound coming from the kitchen. Maybe the comforting smell of coffee and warm bread. Or maybe it was the waitress who moved around the room with that quiet combination of grace and exhaustion. Whatever it was, he didn't feel ready to step back into his busy world just yet. He watched her as she filled water glasses at another table. Her movements careful and practiced. She wasn't pretending to be cheerful, but she wasn't letting herself look worn down either. She had learned the art of being fine, even when she wasn't. He could see that now, when she finally made her way back toward his booth, as she slowed down a little, as if sensing that he wanted to talk again. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there with her hands folded in front of her, waiting for him to speak. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said quietly. She nodded. Sure, he didn't want to sound too direct or pushy. He didn't want her to feel like he was trying to dig into her personal life. But there was a soft openness in her earlier words that made him feel like she wouldn't mind if he asked, as long as he did it gently. "You mentioned earlier that some days the tips aren't enough to get home," he said. "Is it always like that?" She took a small breath and looked down at the floor for a moment before answering. "It depends," she said. "Some days are good. Some days are really slow. And when it's slow, well, you just hope it gets better later. But it doesn't always get better," he guessed. She met his eyes for a second, and the quiet honesty in her expression told him he was right. "No," she said softly. "Not always." He didn't know what to say at first. He wanted to offer her something comforting or something helpful, but he didn't know enough about her life yet. He didn't want to assume anything. She shifted her weight slightly and continued on her own, as if she had decided that he was someone she could trust with the truth, you know? "People think waitressing is simple," she said. "They think you just take orders and bring food to the table, but you spend hours on your feet every day. Your back starts hurting, your legs feel heavy, and sometimes you don't even have time to drink water because you're trying to keep up with everything." Her fingers played nervously with the corner of her apron, twisting the fabric gently, and you keep smiling. Because if you don't smile, people think you're rude. If you look tired, some customers assume you don't care about your job. But the truth is, she stopped, searching for the right words. The truth is, most of us care more than people realize. We put in the effort even when we're exhausted because the tips depend on how the customer feels, not on how we feel. Ethan listened closely, every word sinking in like weight on his chest. She wasn't complaining. She wasn't trying to get sympathy. She was simply telling the truth, something she probably didn't get to do very often. He cleared his throat. "That sounds like a lot to carry." She nodded slightly. "It can be," he hesitated, then asked, "Do you live alone?" She shook her head. "No, I live with my younger brother." He blinked, surprised. "Your brother?" "Yeah." Her voice softened in a way that told him the topic mattered deeply to her. "He's still in school, and he's a good kid. I'm just trying to make sure he doesn't have to worry about things he shouldn't worry about. So you're supporting both of you?" he asked gently. She nodded again. "I pick up extra shifts whenever I can. Morning shifts, evening shifts, double shifts. Whatever they offer. It's not easy, but it's what I can do right now." Ethan felt something heavy settle in his stomach. He imagined her waking up early, traveling across the city, serving tables all day, then going home to take care of her brother. Day after day, no breaks, no time for herself, no safety net. Just work, survival, and responsibility. She must have seen something in his expression. She smiled again, this time in a soft, reassuring way. "It's not all bad," she said. "My brother's doing well in school. He studies hard, and I'm proud of him for that." "It's good," Ethan said sincerely. "It sounds like you're doing everything you can for him." "I hope so," she said quietly. She rubbed her hands together. Not from cold, but from habit, like someone who needed to keep moving, even during a conversation. She looked around the diner, checking if anyone needed help, then returned her focus to him. "You know, when I was younger, I thought life would be different," she said. "I thought things would be simpler. I didn't think I'd be working 2 jobs before turning 25. But things happen, and you just adjust." "You figure it out, what happened?" Ethan asked carefully. She didn't answer right away. She took a slow breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. Life changed fast, she said. My parents moved out of the country for work a few years ago. They send whatever they can, but it's not enough. So, here I am. He nodded slowly, trying to process everything. She wasn't just working long hours. She was carrying the weight of her entire home on her shoulders. I'm sorry, he said gently. That must have been tough, it was, she said. But there's no time to think about how tough things are. When you have responsibilities, you just keep going. Her honesty struck him again, like a quiet truth he had never considered deeply before. She didn't have the luxury to slow down, to rest, or to fall apart. She had someone depending on her, and the world didn't stop to make things easier. He leaned forward slightly. Do you ever get a day off? She laughed softly, almost in disbelief. Not really. If I take a day off, it means less money that week. And less money means, well, it means bills get harder. So you just keep working, he said. She nodded. Pretty much. He wanted to understand everything she wasn't saying. The nights she came home with sore feet. The mornings she had to wake up before sunrise. The moments she probably wanted to cry, but didn't because there was no time for that. But he didn't want to push her into sharing more than she was comfortable with. It didn't matter. He already saw more than she realized. For a moment, they simply stood in a quiet space between two strangers who suddenly weren't strangers anymore. He didn't feel like a customer, and she didn't feel like someone serving him. It felt like two people meeting in a moment of truth neither of them had expected. From behind the counter, the cook called her name softly, letting her know an order was ready. She gave Ethan an apologetic nod. I should go grab that, she said. But thank you for listening. Most people don't ask. And most people don't really want to hear the answer. I wanted to hear it, Ethan said. And I'm glad you told me. She gave him a small, genuine smile, the kind that wasn't forced, the kind that came from feeling understood for once. Then she walked to the counter, picked up the plates, and delivered them to another table. But something about her steps looked lighter than before. Not because her problems were gone, but because sharing a piece of her truth had eased her heart. Even if only for a moment, Ethan watched her with a different kind of awareness now. He saw the strength behind each movement, the quiet determination in her posture, the subtle fight in the way she carried herself. She wasn't just working a job, she was holding her entire world together with her own hands. He looked down at his empty plate and slowly wrapped his fingers around his coffee cup. The warmth of the cup felt different now, heavier somehow, as if the morning itself had taken on new meaning. He had walked into the diner thinking he just wanted breakfast. But now he realized that he had been given something far more powerful, a glimpse into someone else's struggle, someone else's resilience, someone else's life. And even though he didn't know it yet, her words were going to stay with him long after he left the diner. They were going to change the way he looked at people, the way he looked at work, and the way he looked at what really mattered. This morning had become more than just a meal. It had become a moment of truth, one that he couldn't ignore. He spent the rest of the evening sitting on the old chair near his window, the one he rarely used. Something about the quiet around him made the weight of the day feel heavier. It was the kind of silence that forced a person to think. And he thought a lot about the diner, the tired eyes of the waitress, her steady voice when she spoke about needing 2 jobs, and the way she cleaned tables even while holding in her frustration. He kept replaying her words. Not because they were dramatic or loud, but because they were real. They weren't meant to shock him, but they did. And now he couldn't shake them off. He tried distracting himself. He made tea. He scrolled through news on his phone. He even turned on a movie he had watched at least 5 times before. But everything felt hollow. His mind kept drifting back to her. Not in a romantic way, but in a human way. Like someone who had finally seen something he shouldn't ignore. The next morning, he woke up much earlier than usual. It wasn't planned. His mind simply wouldn't let him sleep longer. He sat up in bed and stared at the soft morning light peeking through the curtains. Something felt unfinished. Something felt wrong. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a pull toward doing something he didn't fully understand yet. He went to the kitchen and made a simple breakfast, though he mostly just pushed it around his plate. His appetite wasn't there. His thoughts were somewhere else. He kept wondering if he should go back to the diner. Part of him felt strange about it, like he didn't want to seem intrusive, but another part of him felt like walking away now would mean he had heard her story for nothing. After a long moment of hesitation, he grabbed his keys and stepped outside. The air was still cool, and a soft breeze moved through the trees. As he drove toward the diner, he felt an odd mix of nervousness and determination. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do, but he knew he couldn't just do nothing. When he arrived, the diner looked the same as the day before, quiet, modest, and a little old around the edges. He walked in and noticed a few tables occupied this time. A man in a work uniform sipping coffee, a couple sharing pancakes, a student typing on a laptop. The usual morning crowd. He scanned the room to see if she was working, and then he spotted her. She was behind the counter, focused on wiping down some glasses. She looked more rested than the day before, but there was still a tired heaviness in her posture, the kind that didn't go away with a single night's sleep. When she noticed him, her brows lifted with surprise, and then she gave a polite smile. The kind employees give to returning customers. "You're early today," she said with a light tone as she approached his table. He nodded and returned the smile. "Just thought I'd grab breakfast again." She handed him the menu, though he didn't really need it. She stood beside his table with her small notepad ready. "Same thing as yesterday?" "Sure," he said. "Coffee and toast." She scribbled it down and walked away, her steps quick and practiced. He watched her move between tables, refilling cups, taking orders, clearing plates. She worked with a kind of quiet rhythm, never rushing, but always moving. It was impressive, honestly. After she brought his coffee, she paused just long enough to speak. "By the way," she said softly, "thanks for how you spoke yesterday. Most people don't really listen when I talk about work stuff." It felt nice to be heard. He nodded, feeling a warm sense of connection. "You said things I think a lot of people need to hear." She smiled again, a bit more genuinely this time, before returning to her tasks as he sipped his coffee. He found himself thinking about how many people go through life quietly struggling just like her. People who show up to their jobs every day, doing their best, even when it's not enough to cover the basics. People who don't complain loudly because they know it won't change anything. People who keep going because they have to. He wondered how long she'd been carrying this weight alone when she brought his toast. She sat the plate down gently. "Let me know if you need anything else," she said. He hesitated before responding, unsure if he should bring up the topic again. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable, but he also didn't want her to think her story had fallen on empty ears. "Yesterday," he began slowly, "what you said about working 2 jobs. That must be exhausting." She gave a small sigh, glancing at the table before looking back at him. "It is, but you get used to it. At least that's what I tell myself." She shrugged lightly. "Rent went up again last month. Groceries too. Everything feels heavier these days. So I just take on extra shifts and hope things get better." He listened carefully, feeling that familiar ache in his chest. She wasn't complaining. She was simply telling the truth. "Do you ever get time to rest?" he asked. She shook her head with a tired smile. "Maybe one day. But right now, rest isn't something I can afford." Felt those words hit him again, just like yesterday. Rest isn't something I can afford. How many people lived that way? How many felt like basic comfort was a luxury? He didn't know what tomorrow held for her. He didn't know what the diner paid or whether anything would change, but he knew he wanted to help in some way, even if small. When he finished eating, he reached for his wallet. As he placed the money inside the check holder, he paused. He didn't want to make her feel awkward. He didn't want her to think he saw her as a charity case, but he also couldn't ignore the urge to give something meaningful. He took a slow breath and folded a generous tip inside the holder, much more than usual. But not in a showy way. Something that felt human, supportive, quiet. As he walked out, she noticed the tip, but didn't say anything immediately. She looked at him with an expression that held surprise, gratitude, and something softer like a moment of relief. "Even if temporary." "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. I know, he replied. But I wanted to. She nodded, unable to hide the emotion in her eyes. Thank you, really. He gave a small smile and stepped outside, letting the door close gently behind him. As he stood in the cool morning air, he felt something shift inside him. It wasn't about feeling good for helping. It wasn't about being kind in a dramatic way. It was about understanding someone's truth and choosing not to walk away from it. But deep down, he sensed there was still more he needed to do. Something bigger than just leaving a tip. Something that went beyond one breakfast and one conversation. He didn't know yet what that something was, but he knew part 5 of his journey, and hers had already started forming quietly in the back of his mind. The next few days passed slowly, and he found himself thinking about the diner more often than he expected. He kept remembering the expression on the waitress's face when she realized how much he had tipped her. It wasn't just surprise. It was something deeper, something that came from caring too much on her own for too long. He wasn't sure why her story had stayed with him this way. Maybe because it reminded him of how easily people's struggles go unseen. Maybe because it showed him how much difference a small bit of kindness could make. Whatever the reason was, he knew he wasn't done. One afternoon, he sat at his desk, trying to focus on his work, but his mind drifted again. He had always been the kind of person who believed problems should be solved at the root, not just covered up. And the more he thought about her situation, the more he knew that a one-time tip wouldn't change anything. She needed stability. She needed support that lasted longer than a moment. But he also didn't want to overstep or make assumptions. He didn't want her to feel uncomfortable. He decided he needed to visit the diner one more time, not as someone who wanted breakfast, but as someone who wanted to understand how he could really help, if she even wanted help at all. The next morning, he walked into the diner again. The bell above the door gave its familiar soft ring. The morning crowd was lighter today. A couple sat by the window, and an older man was reading a newspaper at the counter. He looked around for her. She was wiping down the same table she always seemed to start her mornings with. When she looked up and saw him, a warm, genuine smile spread across her face. "You're starting to become a regular," she said with a gentle laugh. "Maybe I am," he replied. She grabbed a menu, even though she already knew his order by heart, and walked toward his table. "Same as always?" she asked. "Actually," he said, shaking his head lightly, "I just came to talk. If you have a moment later." Her expression changed not into worry, but into curiosity. "Sure, I get a short break in about 15 minutes, he nodded, relieved. While he waited, he ordered a glass of water just to keep himself from looking out of place. He watched the way she worked, how she handled every customer with patience. Even when someone was short with her, she responded calmly. He could tell she was used to swallowing her own stress to make others comfortable. That thought hit him harder than he expected. Soon, she walked over and slid into the booth opposite him. She let out a small breath, the kind people release only during a break, when they finally allow themselves a moment to exhale. "So," she said gently, "what's on your mind?" He took a moment to gather his words. He didn't want to sound dramatic. He didn't want her to feel judged or pitied. "You told me something the other day," he began slowly. "About working 2 jobs? About how hard things have been? I haven't been able to stop thinking about it." She looked down, almost embarrassed. "I didn't mean to dump all that on you." "You didn't dump anything," he said. "You were honest, and I'm glad you were. It opened my eyes." She nodded softly, still unsure where the conversation was going. "I don't want to cross any lines," he said carefully, "but I want to help if you're open to it." She blinked, surprised. "Help how?" He hesitated, not wanting to say something that sounded forced. "Tell me what you need most right now." "Not someday. Right now." She leaned back slightly, stunned by the question. No one had ever asked her that so directly. She stared at the table for a moment before answering. "Honestly," she said quietly, "I need time. I need to breathe. I need one job that pays enough so I don't have to run between 2 places. I want a day off without worrying I'll fall behind on bills." He listened carefully, absorbing every word. "I'm tired," she admitted. "Really tired. And I don't want to keep living like this forever." but I don't have many options." There was no dramatic pause after she spoke. No heavy music. Just silence, the kind that only happens when someone reveals the truth they've been holding in for too long. He nodded slowly. "I understand." But he didn't just understand. He felt it deeply. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small envelope. He placed it on the table gently. She stared at it, unsure. "What is that?" she asked. "It's nothing strange," he said softly. "Just something that might help give you a little breathing room." She opened it carefully and froze. Inside was a stack of bills, not flashy or extreme, but enough to help with rent, groceries, and maybe a bit more. Enough for her to take a few extra days off if she needed them. Her eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. I can't take this." "You can," he said. "And you should. It's not a handout. It's a thank you. A thank you." She repeated, confused. "Yes," he said. "A thank you for reminding me that people are out here working harder than anyone realizes. A thank you for being honest with a stranger. A thank you for opening my eyes to what life is like for so many people." She covered her mouth with her hand for a moment. "Overwhelmed? I don't know what to say." She whispered, "You don't have to say anything. But I don't want you to." "Think," she started. "I don't think anything except that. You're someone who deserves a break," he said. Gently she wiped her eyes and breathed shakily. The kind of breath someone takes when a weight they've been carrying suddenly becomes lighter, even if only a little. "This helps more than you know," she said quietly. "I've been so close to falling behind. I didn't know what I was going to do next month. I'm glad it helps," he said. "But please understand this isn't charity. If anything, it's an overdue reminder to myself to actually see people, not just pass by them." She nodded, her voice soft as she replied, "Thank you, truly." They talked a little longer, nothing heavy. Just small things, like favorite foods, funny moments at work, and how she dreamed of one day taking a real weekend off. For the first time, she seemed relaxed, lighter, almost like the version of herself she never had time to be anymore. When her break ended, she stood up slowly. "I hope you come back again," she said with a warm smile. "Not because of this," she tapped the envelope lightly, "but because you're one of the few people who actually listens." He smiled. "I'll be around." As he walked out of the diner, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of purpose. Not because he had solved anything big, because he had done something small that mattered. And for her, the difference was even greater. That envelope gave her the chance to take a weekend off for the first time in over a year. She spent it resting, cleaning her small apartment, catching up on sleep, and calling a friend she hadn't spoken to in months. She even smiled more the following week. People at the diner noticed. What started as a simple breakfast had turned into something much more meaningful. Not a grand story, not a dramatic rescue, just a human beings meeting in the middle of real life, sharing truth, kindness, and understanding. Sometimes, change doesn't come from big gestures or loud moments. Sometimes, it begins quietly with one person listening, another person speaking, and both choosing not to walk away.